Hello, everyone. We're going to start an Instagram live on Feng Shui in English. Okay, Laura is here. Yes, it's working. Okay, let's start. I'm going to do a little intro. So today we're going to have one of the most exciting conversations, which ties in my two favorite topics, design and energy, meaning the seen and the unseen. And the question today that we're going to discuss in this live is how can you use Feng Shui in your home to improve your well-being? So I'm going to talk a little bit about Laura. I'm going to try to summarize it. Otherwise, I could talk about your life and your accomplishments for the next 20 minutes. So Laura Cerrano here is the president and CEO of Feng Shui Manhattan. So she's based in New York. Your mother was one of the first accredited Feng Shui consultants in America. And you told me that you used to go, when we had a conversation on the phone, you said you used to go with your mom at age 7 when she was doing her in-home consultations. You were following her around. Then you decided to make it your life calling as well. And you've been certified since 1997. And I had to calculate that is 25 years ago. You have helped thousands of people to reduce stress, anxiety, depression, helped improve their focus, sleep, and people's overall well-being by coming to their home and offering guidance about their space. Another very notable point that I observed about your career is that you also help people who are undergoing chemotherapy and fertility treatments for a complementary healing. They're doing like Western traditional medicine, of course, but you offer that as complementary healing. So Feng Shui is not only healing, but it's also preventive, meaning you don't have to wait to have some life crisis to look into it. It's meant to be used on a daily basis. You do residential, commercial, retail, institutional, industrial, and healthcare facilities from New York to California, India, Dubai, and Kuwait. And let me do a little bit of name dropping. I hope this is not too uncomfortable for you, Laura. You implemented Feng Shui for Warner Music Group in New York, Morgan Stanley in New York, the Catholic Diocese of San Diego in California, LinkedIn Corporation, Columbia University in New York, the consulting corporation Deloitte in California, and the jewelry company Tiffany in New York, and the list goes on and on and on with universities, real estate leading firms, etc. So Laura, without waiting too much more, tell us what is Feng Shui?
Yes, I'm just gonna make a quick little correction. So I fooled you. I was in 7th grade and 12 years old. Because that would be amazing if I was in, 7 years old doing that. But all good. So yes, fast forwarding, what is Feng Shui? So I'm going to give you guys the modern day breakdown just to keep it simple. Essentially, Feng Shui is saying, how can we look at our space and understand that it's becoming a metaphor and an extension of who we are, our focuses, the perspective on life, our choices. And that, I would say that's a big one too, not just perspective, but being aware and conscious and being aware of the subconscious interaction with your environment. But again, having clear perspective and just having a better connection with your everyday choices, because whether it's modern day Feng Shui or if it's classical, it's always coming down to helping people understand how to make better choices that will lead them to a more thriving, vital life. Whether it's the food you eat, the people you choose to interact with, the environments you're constantly in, how you choose to talk to people or talk to yourself. That's at least from my experience and what I've seen with clients, that seems to be a real core to the process and outcome of utilizing the principles of Feng Shui in your lifestyle. To not a one-time, I do this and that and it's over. This is constant change and learning to be adaptable and accountable for your decisions at the same time.
Makes sense. So I think everyone is interested in this topic, whether they want to use it or not. It applies to everyone. So we're going to jump into the conversation and we're going to divide it in two parts, the seen and the unseen, meaning what are the things that you see in your space and the ones that you do not see. In the seen category, we're going to talk about decluttering, furniture placement, colors, and the 5 elements. And in the unseen category, we're going to talk about your predecessors. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. In French, it's prédécesseur, space clearing, and energy cords. So if you're watching the replay right now and you're interested in a specific point, you can jump right to that point. So in the scene, Laura, let's start with decluttering.
All right, so decluttering, the buzzword, the catch-all. There are going to be different interpretations or perspectives on this. So for me, I'll usually say when we're talking about decluttering, yes, there's the physical, but then it could subdivide itself into the emotional, mental, and spiritual as well. And then, of course, you have the physical. So the physical decluttering, I usually recommend people start that before they dig even further into the aspects of Feng Shui, because usually what tends to happen is people will say, oh, I want to bring in Feng Shui, but I have a lot of items here or stagnation there. So how I see it is actually editing things from the home, from areas within the home, depending on your intention for why you're doing something. That in itself is actually changing the energy, changing the mindset, changing the perspective. So that would be on the physical, but also it can then branch into the emotional, mental, and spiritual, because depending on what are these objects, who gave it to you, what's the memory attached to them, where are they actually located in the house, because then we'll use what's called the Bagua or Pakwa map. And it will divide up the entire home if you take the map and superimpose it over the whole space. And it will give you 8 primary sections. And so basically, once you begin to realize, oh, I have this type of clutter, items, or XYZ in these zones that are actually hindering me from either moving forward in my life or literally taking up space. If I'm saying, hey, I want to attract a relationship, a new job, right? This is all really foundational and we've heard it before, but we live in a society that loves to consume. And so we consume and we hold on. And then we also have grandparents who came from, right, the Depression era. So they're consuming, holding on. And then we're like, oh my God, emotional memories. And we hold on and the cycle continues. So anxiety builds, stress, guilt. I don't want to let this go, you know. There are all different levels to this, but the bottom line is if you have accumulated all these items that could emotionally be keeping you stuck mentally, physically, spiritually, then that's an indication of something has to give. Something has to be released, and that's a basic foundation in any energy work, whether it's Reiki, acupuncture, Feng Shui, whatever it may be. You have to create space in order to allow that change to come in. And that can be very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And we're seeing it just as we're emerging. We're not fully out of COVID, yes, but people are like, I want to hold on to the old way of doing stuff. That's gone. So adaptability, and that's what this is encouraging. Accept change, acknowledge it, and participate. And so when you declutter, that's the metaphor, that's the symbol to encourage that new lifestyle habit, really, and maintenance.
I agree 100%. And that's my first step, and also sometimes a challenge when I enter a client's home when they want to redesign or they're telling me they want a specific new style. My first step, I'm a minimalist, and I understand that not everyone is like that, is decluttering, because a lot of my clients tell me, I want to build built-ins and storage. And I'm very happy because the more built-ins, the more storage I build, the more money I make, but it's not going to work well with the style and the energy flow. So I try to tell them, do you want to get rid of those things instead of building storage? It's like a vicious circle. You buy things, and you build storage to put those things in, then your living space is reduced, and we're already in New York. So that is a challenge for me. How would you suggest people are make the decision between what they want to keep and what they throw? Because there's always an excuse not to throw things.
Yeah, there's always an excuse, and I'm being honest and transparent. Like, I have my own little piles, like a little squirrel I nest away. And so my background is an artist, so that was what I was originally trained in as well. So anyone who's an artist out there, you know, we accumulate paintbrushes and we don't want to throw away that stuff because it's expensive. So that is where I will have my own kind of jockeying of space. But I've also said, you know what, the house has enough room for it. So the basement is for certain things like that. And then the next level, one room is dedicated to studio/office space. So that's fine. But one of the tips that my mom taught me, she said, whatever you don't need, use or love, release, let it go. And again, the metaphor is reminding us that whether it's physical stuff, or personal relationships or new opportunities or the perspective of that, you know, outcome, you have to release it. And the other thing is you can make principles for yourself. So for me, some people will say, oh, this is hardcore, but I don't care. This is what works for me. I say, if I acquire one new thing,
you throw another thing out.
I throw it, I release, I like to donate, right? At least 3 things. So I'm like, okay, if I'm going to bring it into my house or I'm going to wear it on my body or whatever, it's recreational sporting stuff, I better absolutely need it. And the other thing my mom would say is, do you love it? And there are certain things like when we go camping or stuff like that. Yeah, I love it and I need it and I use it often. Right? So I'm just giving you like quick, very practical cues that can offer ways to gauge yourself. Now, what about historical items? Those things, like I have a lot of World War II stuff from grandpa and all that stuff. That stuff doesn't go anywhere. But
that goes into things you love category, right?
That would go into things you love. And I actually have some stuff like images of like Grandpa Peter where he's with Clark Gable. Like, that's awesome. That's family history and it's really cool. And so obviously that's, you know, up on the wall. And so these are ways you can differentiate and decide, because remember, the other aspect of this is the things that you have in your house, right? As they say, will it spark joy? Will it make you feel good? In Feng Shui terms, we say, is it aligning with your focus, with supporting the subconscious? So, right. And again, those 9 categories go into 9 life experiences. So that category of that family photo would go into ancestors. They would go into the family realm. And then you can say, oh, okay, where is that located in the house? And you can play using that map to help orient the elements, the subject matter, the artwork. And things will always shift and change. But that's just one example of a historical item. And then just being very practical as well. I'm not going to be on the earth for forever, ever. So I say, okay, when it's time to release these items, do I give them to a museum? Will they be passed on to family? So that can also help alleviate that stress. Like, who's going to get it? When you're gone, you know, that's that. So maybe you come back, maybe you don't, whatever the theories are. But why worry about what's going to happen that's so far possibly in the future, and just say, this is the game plan and that's that, so I can live in the moment, right? So again, these are at least approaches that I find work for me. And if you're not sure, it's always good to hire a local organizer to guide you and coach you through the process.
Absolutely. I work with a home organizer. It helps people to make decisions sometimes when they're blocked. And should I keep this, donate it, or toss it? So that's a great first pragmatical tip you gave us, Laura. Decluttering. Anything you don't use, need, or love, donate it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk now about furniture placement in Feng Shui.
All right. So once you get your canvas cleared, as they say, then you can start re-editing and adding. So I like to use the metaphor as a painter, because that's basically what we're doing. We're getting the background prepped, and then we start working on the mid-ground. So that would be the furniture. So the bigger or the middle details, But furniture is essential, but it's not 100% the definition of feng shui. It only has become that because that's the lifestyle we live. We live in, you know, boxes and rectangles, and we have to sit down on stuff. So be it. But essentially, when we talk about furniture placement, a few things to keep in mind. The first is when you're arranging the furniture, this is very common sense, very practical. You want to make sure the way it's set up is that you're not going to place too many pieces of furniture. And I've seen that where people think, oh, it's a huge room or it's a small room and I got to fill it up, and you don't. So we go back to what's essential, but also what can help you is even just keeping feng shui aside, what's the functionality of the room? What's the purpose it's going to serve, right? A lot of base foundations. And then if you know, oh, I'm going to be somebody who's entertaining, right? Certain houses might be set up for that, or maybe I'm going to have in-home office meetings, or maybe I'm going to have like a preschool, whatever. You have to know the nature and the function, and that will help with the amount of furniture. And then you can also pay attention to the style of furniture. So in feng shui, we actually encourage choosing designs that do not have a 90-degree angle all the time. So this is called Sha energy, or it could be very dramatic, and they'll call it like a poison dagger and things of that nature. But essentially what they're saying is, if you have a lot of sharp edges protruding from the wall, or the design of tables that are constantly pointing at you when you're working or sleeping, the belief is that it can cut into your aura, just keeping it simple. So instead, it's actually encouraged to mimic the design of nature. And you'll find this in biophilic design. This is a real thing. You can Google it, and they've done research on it where they actually talk about human beings do prefer shapes, whether it's within rooms or artwork, that have more rounded or curved edges. And they notice that people will be more calm emotionally and mentally. And also on top of that, when they did these surveys, they also found that people just said, yes, it makes us feel more connected to nature, and it just allows us to feel more grounded. So there is science behind that. So that's why for those who are in New York, you see, like, I think, what is it? The skyline, right? Where you walk on the high line. The high line, not the skyline, the high line.
It's the same.
So, yeah, so that's part of that biophilic design of saying we're in an urban setting, so let's get some nature in there, trees, water, flowers, you know, and make it more sociable. So we're doing it, but we're so on autopilot, we don't even recognize it until it gets pointed out. The little island in New York City, that's a great example. Go there and see all the curves, and they have everything, all the elements are there. Not only with the water on the Hudson River, but also they have music, so that's metal element. They have the wood element, which is trees. They have the natural rocks, and the list goes on and on. So furniture arrangement just jumped into architectural structures, but you can see it will still work in that realm. And then also commanding position. This is foundational as well. So what this means, and this is also in biophilic design, they call it having a place of refuge. In feng shui, we say it's having a commanding position. Both are the same, and they're essentially saying wherever you're sitting or doing work or even eating, you have a clear vantage point of who's coming into the room. And you can test this theory out when you go out to the restaurants. How do you like to position yourself? I know for me, I like to see who's coming in as often as I can. There can be exceptions to the principle. That's why they're principles. But in general, we usually say commanding position is a solid wall behind you. You feel totally supported and secure, and you can see who's coming in through the doorways. So those
what if you have multiple doors, Laura?
So if you have multiple doors, now that's a really great question. So let's say if you have multiple doors, and maybe the best place to position a couch, hypothetically, is on the backing of like a window, like a row of windows. So then what you can do, I'm giving a hypothetical scenario here. what you could do if you're the homeowner and you actually have land, what if the landlord is open to working with you, you can say, okay, let me take a look outside. What's behind me with that window? Maybe we can have some bushes or maybe a tree or a fence or something that actually creates a set, like a feeling or a view of feeling more secure. So you can do that. Again, this is a hypothetical. You could also have curtains. If you're into the crystal world, you could play with crystals, or you can even, depending on what's behind the couch, if you have a window ledge or a console table, you can even place some plants. Again, there's a lot of variables to this. But the main takeaway is if it's better to have a vantage point of a particular door, then you see what's available wall space wise that will set you up to have the most commanding setup, and then you work with the space accordingly. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Amazing.
So yeah, so that would be the other takeaway for furniture. So you could see there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and I'll add this. The other reason we may play with furniture arrangement, whether it's Feng Shui consultants or dowsers, is because we're also being mindful of what they call geopathic stress. So any trauma that's happened to the earth, whether it's earth energy lines, usually honestly it's more so earth energy lines or water veins. And the main takeaway is if those lines become corrupted or contaminated by emotions or other contaminants literally, and the person is sitting over it for a long period of times, or they're sitting over a nod, meaning there's crossing points with these energy lines, it could potentially impact them. And that was actually something that happened to my mom. Again, there's no science yet. We're hoping for that. But that was the only thing that I could make logical sense out of something that was non-logical, that doctors couldn't provide any feedback. Again, take everything I say with a grain of salt. But yes, so this is basically just saying that's another reason we'd say move out of the alignment of that detrimental energy that's potentially crossing or coming through. And there's more on that, but that's another perspective of furniture arrangement.
Can you remind us what a dowser is?
Yeah, so essentially a dowser, back in the olden days, and they still do it now, especially in California, they would be looking for water wells, underground water lines, and that's a real thing. In today's modern approach, you could call it spiritual dowsing if you want. The intention is to, yes, you can still look for that, but for the everyday occupant inside a home, we want to make sure that they're not going to get impacted in a negative way. So the dowser will use different tools. They can use L rods, or for me, I have a pendulum. So you'll program the pendulum accordingly. And just like any tool that you use for space clearing or for investigating earth energies or geopathic stress, or even checking your chakras, there's a lot you can do with these guys. You build a relationship with that tool. And as they say with crystals, the tool will pick you. So, and you could see this one actually, I don't know if you could see it, it's missing the tip. I call it, it took a hit for me. So sometimes the tool, if you're investigating something that might be heavy energy or whatever, sometimes the tool itself will take the hit of that energy versus the human, if you will. So again, I know I'm going out on a ledge here, but these are different approaches and perspectives. But essentially the dowser is just saying, how can we connect to the subtle energies of the earth, the building, and or the person, and have a deeper conversation in terms of deep listening through various ranges of questions. You could do charts that offer a yes, no, that gauge the energy level. And then you can either use tools and or prayer to help reset the energy. And just to make this very clear, I am not doing it. It's what we call, as I was taught, management, God, universe, whatever term you want to use. Same thing with Feng Shui. We are not doing it. Same thing with Reiki. We are not doing it. We're just the messenger and the channel.
It chooses you. Yeah.
Yeah. So the clearer we are as the conduit, the better we can pass on the information.
Okay. And for the pragmatical aspect of it, how does the pendulum work? It's on energy waves, like this scientific explanation of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, there's still, like I said, the topics we're going into, we're kind of weaving into the non-tangible aspect of this world. So some will say it's the subconscious that kicks in, and there's all these little nerve endings that then go from the receptor of the brain, right? And then it will do tiny little tweaks and movements, and so you allow it. So even though, yes, you're like, oh, look, her hand is moving, yes, right now I'm making it move, but there are times where I've seen it go sideways, and that's a whole other conversation. But that's, even today, people are starting to have this conversation and say, okay, how is it doing that? Like, I show my husband, he's like, ooh, he's all freaked out, but it's fun. Like, you still, but with anything, honestly, it deserves the utmost respect and prep before you even step into that, because whether it's Feng Shui, Reiki, dowsing, even acupuncture, all those guys, you're stepping into another person's energy field, while at the same time you're stepping outside of your own energy field to get or gain information. So that's why I said the person who's receiving, you want to make, or communicating rather, you want to make sure your self-care is on point. And when it's not, you're going to know. So, but that could be like a whole other discussion in itself. But as you could see, what happens is Feng Shui is not just that, right? It starts to subdivide itself and overlap and parallel into these other topics. And even today, especially with what's been going on, there is no linear. It's constantly changing. It's constantly moving in a circular, up, down, its own rhythm. So, yeah.
So, okay, perfect. For the pragmatical tips you just gave us about furniture placement, it is, don't put too much furniture in your space. It's not because you have a big space that you need a lot of furniture. Make sure you have round edges versus sharp edges. Look at the commanding position, meaning that you can see wherever you're sitting, you can see who is coming in the door that is close to you. And also be mindful of the energies